got to interview one of the incredible members of our community, Tad Hargrave with Marketing for Hippies. Many of you know Tad through his marketing workshops because he's been across the country with them, but I think his reach is across the world. Tad is also an incredible seed planter, and he's been a part of or initiated so many projects and events for the community that really bring us together and make the world a better place. So it's natural we're going to want the opinion from this wonderful man because he's pretty high caliber. This series of interviews is geared towards the holistic community and green and alternative communities. And we tend to look at the world and look at business in a very different way. And so in this interview, I wanted it very focused. And from Tad, I asked his wisdom on different ways of charging in our business, different models of it. So he offers his wisdom on the pay what you can model, sliding scale, bartering and trading, charging what you're worth, gift economy, and more. What I really love about Tad's wisdom is that he seems to be someone that sits back and observes many different things on multiple levels. So when he finally presents his wisdom, it's very deep and insightful and intuitive and feels really good on the inside. It's very whole. And when you use this wisdom on the outside, it's incredibly powerful. So this is someone I really admire, and I hope you enjoy the interview.
My name is Tad Hargrave. I'm from marketingforhippies.com, and I help hippies with their marketing. So I help conscious, community-minded, holistic, green sort of entrepreneurs who are struggling to articulate what they do, or find enough clients to get the kind of clients they want without doing things that feel gross or cost a fortune.
How did you get into this?
So I got into this because I had a lot of friends who were wanting to start green businesses or some sort of conscious venture, and I really wanted to support them. And they would tell me about their ideas, and we'd be at the bar and they'd be sharing their ideas, and as I'd be listening, I'd just be thinking, "Oh no, this is terrible. This is like your marketing is awful," and I'd always want to help them. And so those conversations happened enough that eventually I just thought, man, I should do this for a living and charge for this. I've just always been nerdy about marketing. But I've had this background of sort of activism and community building, but then also was kind of nerdy about marketing, and for a while was very anti-capitalist and anarchist and going to protests, and finally reconciled that there was a way that a multinational global corporation like Monsanto is different than a locally owned mom and pop shop, and so something I was able to reconcile this sort of business and this activist part of me, and then the marketing for hippies came out of that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Why are you so passionate about this? Why do you love it?
I feel like there are 5 reasons that I talk about a lot of why marketing matters so much. I guess one is that I think the solutions to all of the problems that we face exist for the most part. Whether it's, we've got alternative energy, we've got permaculture, we've got alternative healing modalities, we've got straw bale, and, et cetera, et cetera. So we've got so many of the solutions, but if people don't know about the solutions, they're not aware of them, then they functionally don't exist. And people finding out about stuff is marketing, and people understanding stuff is marketing. Because sometimes even if somebody knows about something, but they don't understand what it is, or they misunderstand what it is, it still kind of doesn't really exist for them as an option. I think number 2 is that there's something about marketing that makes us better at what we do, because it forces clarity on a lot of issues, and it's easy to just go around talking about how great what you do is without any sense of the impact of it on the other person. I think a lot of people, we can just get very self-absorbed in what we do and not think about how does this impact other people, how does this what are the real results it provides for them, or does it actually solve a problem for them, or do we just love to do this and we want people to pay us for it even though it doesn't really add much value to their life. And I think marketing also makes us better at what we do, because as we get better at marketing, we get more clients, and getting more clients is what gets us more real world practice anyways. Number 3, I don't know if I'll remember all 5 of these, but I feel like marketing, like we are where we are in our lives usually because of people who came before us, who inspired us in some way, that they showed us something was possible, and And I think similarly, there are a lot of people looking at us. And if they see that, and there's so many people who work the 9-to-5 job, and they are, they would love to, have a holistic practice, and like, I could be paid to do massage. What, like that would be amazing. Or they would love to have a green business, or just get out of the corporate rat race. Stop working for oil and gas, stop working for industries that they don't support. And yet, it's hard. It's just scary to make that leap. So I think they look at people like us who are doing it. And if they look at us and they see that we're broke and struggling and miserable, then it's like, why would they move? And so I feel like there's a real power. As much as somebody could say, yes, follow your dreams. And, I just feel like seeing one person who's done it and made it work is way more inspiring in practical terms than reading all the books you could about following your dreams. So I feel like if we're wanting to inspire other people to be doing this, marketing matters. But also, like, as we learn the language of marketing, we're able to help our friends better, because I think we're usually just inherently, by not being in the midst of their problem, we can see their issues more clearly. So it's like somebody from outside our business can usually see our business more clearly than we can. But if they additionally have the language of marketing and understanding, I think they can help more. So I'm really inspired by the idea of movement globally of savvy do-gooders who actually get a way of marketing that feels good, and therefore are able to help their friends better. So I just feel like marketing is the and then of course, the obvious one is, if you handle your marketing, you get more clients, you make more money. So I just feel like we need to see these alternatives thriving. We need to see more, of these alternatives, and marketing is often the stopgap. It's usually like a pretty good product. The customer service is fine, but the marketing is usually where it just completely falls apart, and people are like, "What do you do? I don't understand it." And they explain it. It's more confusing. Nobody ever hears about it in the first place. So, yeah.
The topic that I'd like to talk with you today is around money and charging. And being a beloved member of our community who has worked with so many holistic and green business owners and individuals, is there anything that you've noticed about our relationship with money that's kind of common to this community?
Oh, man. Whew. I don't know, it feels definitely like a complicated one. I would say generally what I see in the holistic scene is there's a lot of collapsing around money. There's a lot of giving it away for free. There's a lot of their needs matter, mine don't. I'm just here to be of service, sort of martyring ourselves because we want people to love us. And so when somebody's like, what do you charge? Then it's like, we say, oh, it's $100 an hour. But if they wince at all, we're just like, we're 50 to 20, 10, free. I pay you. I'll just pay you. It's the first time I'll pay you. And so there's this kind of dissembling and giving it away. And so that's the biggest thing that I see. And then I see like the flip side of that. I got this from a group called Authentic World in the Bay Area, this idea of posturing and collapsing. And so like, if most of what happens in the holistic scene is this collapsing, sometimes I feel like what happens is then people go to the posturing side. And the posturing is where people puff themselves up and pretend. And this is where I think we start to hear a lot of the rhetoric of charging what you deserve. And you do deserve more than this. And isn't your work worth more? And then people can get, indignant. Like, yes, this is worth more. And so then there can be a puffing up. And then people charging more than actually is appropriate or feels right. And then they might find an amount that's great, but sometimes they don't, and people notice that they're posturing and point it out, and then there's, oh God, I feel terrible, I'm running right back to the collapsing, and or they just have to posture harder. So I feel like there's a uneasy relationship to money. Like it feels, people I think feel like they either have to just collapse and give it all away, or to make the money they have to set huge boundaries and puff up and posture and like kind of become real aggro about it. So I would say that's a general pattern I see. I would say it's the flip for a lot of conventional business where there's so much posturing all over the place. And that's the dominant pattern. But in the holistic scene, I would say it's like 95% collapsing.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I suppose too, if it's a bunch of people who have those solutions for world problems like you were talking about, or like doing good things, like their skill set might not be in marketing themselves or...
Right. No, definitely not. I mean, I think just in general, who wants to market themselves? Like, very few people I think are inherently excited about that or good at that. Very few people actually really like tooting their own horn and bragging. I mean, so yeah, who wants to do that? And I think it's like especially true in the holistic scene, because I think then that gets into like, well, I'm doing healing work and I'm helping people, and should I even be charging for this in the first place? And should I be marketing it in these really gross ways? But then people go broke, so then they think, well, I need to make some money, so then they'll go to these courses and learn ways to do it that feel inauthentic and can actually take them away from the heart of their work. And yeah, so it's tricky, it's confusing. I don't think it's an easy one to figure out.
I agree.
Yeah.
One of the other things I think that we find in our community is some unique ways of approaching charging and money. So this is what I'm hoping to talk with you today about, is going through different, is it money models or charging models, and because I know that you're aware of a lot of that and practice some yourself. So what do you think of that?
That sounds great. Yeah, it's funny. Well, I did a workshop with one of my colleagues, Amatma, in San Francisco last year or year before, and we called it fuck money, but it was just like screw money, who needs money, and just looking at these alternative models of barter and gift economy and trading and pay what you can and all that, and so yeah, this is a topic I'm super excited about. So
awesome. So I think what would be appropriate to start with was one that you use very often, is the pay what you can. Yeah. So can you tell us what that is and your thoughts on that? Yeah,
so pay what you can is, I mean, there's within each of these, I think, ideas, there's a lot of different models, but for me, where it came from, or at least the model that I use, is really based on street performing. So in street performing, like when I was 12, I used to go watch all the street performers all the time, and the idea is you do the show up front and they pay at the end. So it's not a pay what you can, is like, show up and then pay whatever you want at the beginning and hope that feels good at the end. The onus is really on you as a street performer to like do a really good show and inspire people to give. And it's like on the street, there's zero obligation for people to stick around or to pay you. It's anonymous. People can just like slip out and vanish. So with street performing, you just got to be so good that they're like, they would actually feel guilty about leaving without paying. They want to give you, you charm them with that. And so that's the model that I use with workshops is so I do a 3.5-day workshop. And that one is a totally pay what you can. So people attend the whole 3.5 days. There's $100 deposit. Because I found if I didn't charge the deposit, then there were a lot of no-shows because like there was just no commitment to be there. And since I'm printing workbooks and booking a venue, it's like, and turning people away potentially, it doesn't make sense for there to be a lot of no-shows. So there's a $100 deposit, but then they pay whatever they want to pay at the end. And I've experimented with giving the deposit back or not, and sometimes it's just a question of how logistically easy or difficult that is. But yeah, so I've been doing that for like 12 years, pretty much since I started. I started just charging, what I imagined were regular rates for a workshop, but then switched very quickly into pay what you can. And it's interesting because I think people would look at something like pay what you can, and the initial thing is like, oh, it's so generous of you and sort of selfless. And the reality in my mind is that there are actually more selfish benefits of doing pay what you can than selfless. Like from a selfless standpoint, for sure, it's more accessible. I think it's more accountable because people get to experience it and then actually decide what they want to pay. So yeah, there's there's that. There's all these selfless reasons to do it that I think it's better for the way. And it's also, I think it's like it breeds a nice trust in the marketplace where people get to feel like, wow, I really got to choose what I paid. I didn't get pushed into something. But the selfish benefits are like people. It's so much easier to promote my workshops. It's so much easier to get people to come because they know it's pay what you can. So, there's an option to pay me the full amount if they want to, because some people are so uneasy with pay what you can. But there are people who, and I'll ask them, I'll be like, if I had charged, $1,700 for this 3.5 days, raise your hand if you would have come. And nobody ever raises their hand, so it's like, but they're all coming and they're paying me something. And whereas if I were charging $1,700 for a weekend, I would probably have to do a ton of free intros and pitch it hard and spend a lot of time talking about it. Whereas with the pay what you can, I just do my intro and then I'm like, so if you like this content, we're going to go more into this in my weekend. It's pay what you can. You sign up if you want. So it takes the pressure out of it a lot. There's real good vibes as a result of it. The word of mouth is much stronger on it because I think I've done a study on this, but I assume it's a lot easier for people to tell their friends and more compelling to say, hey, go to this workshop. It's pay what you can. Then go to this workshop. It's $1,700. So it just, for me, it works so well. And it's not that I do pay what you can. And I think this is an important thing in terms of these alternative payment methods. It can be easy to have a dogmatic approach and feel like, oh, everything needs to be pay what you can, or everything needs to be barter, or sliding scale. And that can be a form of collapse too. So I charge $300 an hour right now for the one-on-one. There's another workshop I just do a flat $250 for. So there's different, I think, approaches and uses in different situations. And I think if people get too caught up, like I used to do pay what you can one-on-one, and I just didn't find I was getting paid amounts that felt great, so I stopped doing it. And other people have found ways to make that work, but for me, I just didn't find a way that I just kind of started resenting it. So, and I would say that's the big sign that you're collapsing, is that you start resenting it. And maybe you feel like you shouldn't be resenting it and you try to work on that, but ultimately, like, there's something in the structure and the model of what you're doing that has you ongoingly feel resentment towards your community. And yeah.
What are people's response to this model? Like, what's their feedback that they give you? You said some are uncomfortable and some totally love it, or
overall super positive. Yeah, people really are delighted by it, because I think also part of what works is it's a contrast to what they perceive as like this high pressure sales, all these high pressure sales techniques, trying to get them into high end programs, or like $10,000 for something, and then maybe they use it even, maybe they don't, or it's not as good as they thought it would be. So I think there's sort of a backlash against that. So people, it's just so refreshing for people. And it's also uncomfortable for some people because at least if you're paying a flat fee, it's done. There's a sense of completion about it. I paid, if it was really terrible, you get a refund. But basically, if it was good enough, it's over, and it's simple. And there's no chance of offending the person because they were the one that set the price. But with pay what you can, they're setting the price. And so the big reason, I think, people often have this fear of, I'm going to offend Tad. I don't want to, what if I don't have a lot of money, so if I give too little, is he going to be offended? That can come up a lot for people. So, and because of that, I've had people be like, well, I don't want to come then, because I wouldn't want to offend you. Like, they don't tell me that, but if I pursue it a little bit, that's what shows up. So I think this is something else to lift up. There's no it's not like there's any payment structure that works for everybody. I've definitely had people not come because it was pay what you can. I'd say more people come than don't come, but it's not like it reduces every risk across the board. Yeah.
I think in observing you, that seems to be the success of your business, is kind of that informal nature of it, like you talked about, because it's not a get rich quick kind of thing, right? Like where it's high powered business strategies and things like that. Though you're giving good tools, but I could see how it's easygoing, it's community based. It's like, come on, let's just hang out.
Would turn some other people off. I think there's this idea like, oh, we'll find one strategy that's just going to work for everybody, and everyone's going to be drawn to it. And if we just do this easygoing pay what you can thing, everyone will want it. Which is not true. There's some people just, like, I did a workshop in Black Diamond, Alberta, which is pretty rural and probably more conservative. And there are people who just didn't want to come to the workshop because it was called Marketing for Hippies, and they were just like, I'm not a hippie. So, yeah, nothing works for everybody.
Makes sense. Let's talk about bartering.
All right. So barter or trading is the idea of somebody wants to come to my workshop and they say, Ted, I don't have any money, but could I arrange the venue for you, to do the workshop and you could stay at my place? Or could I do some promoting for you maybe? Or, could I cook you food or something like that? Trading services and goods for other services and goods. And I think it's great. I think it can be wonderful. I tend not to do it because I travel so much, so I don't actually am not able to use a lot of the stuff that I would be bartered with. But I think it can be wonderful. It can be a real way out of the sort of cash economy. The place I see it run into challenges is people don't treat it like money. Like back in the day, I got a website done and I traded 50 hours of time for it. And then they were very slack about getting me the website. And if I paid cash, I think they would have hustled a lot more. So I think sometimes people don't treat it as seriously as if it was money. So I think if there is a barter, I just think it needs to be written down. There needs to be a very explicit kind of agreement and contract around that, because it can be very easy for one person to give their side of the bargain and the other person doesn't give theirs. And I think also people can with barter. People can collapse a lot around that and be like, oh, you want to just bring a jar of sprouts for my weekend workshop? Okay, if that's all you have. So I think it can be easy to do that as well. So I think it's great. I think it can be really wonderful. I know I've done it and will continue to do it. But yeah, I think it's one of those things that it ends up becoming so much fuzzier because it's not just this many dollars for this many dollars. So I just think it's important for both sides to really feel into, does this feel like a fair exchange? Does this feel good for both sides? And then just make it clear and follow through on it.
I love that. Yeah, a clear agreement. Okay. You wrote this very passionate article recently about charge what you're worth.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about that.
So there's just this notion, I've seen it around a lot, of charge what you're worth, charge what you deserve. Don't you believe you're worth more than this? If I were to ask a room full of people, don't you think you're worth more than you're being paid? I think most people would probably raise their hands to that. And I think for some people, they understand it in a fairly healthy way, which is charge what your work is worth to other people. Have a fair charging. But I think how it often gets communicated and understood is very much more personal. There's like charging what I'm worth personally, which is where I think it gets really confusing. And I think this gets money and self-worth get conflated and connected in all these really sticky ways and tricky ways that I think ultimately hurt us. Where you'll be at a workshop and they'll be pitching their big program and they'll say, it's $10,000 and aren't you worth $10,000? Aren't you worth this? Don't you deserve this? Don't you deserve this trip to Hawaii? Don't you? And if you don't invest in this program, then obviously you don't value yourself. And so then it becomes like, oh God, if I don't, and if I'm not charging a certain amount, then it's a self-esteem issue. And don't you believe you're worth that money? And I think there are like ways that can actually be a healthy conversation, but I find so often it gets just turned into this unhealthy connection of money to our personal lives. And, we talk about how much Donald Trump is worth, or Warren Buffett's his financial worth. But it's like, it's his net financial assets, but it's not his net worth as a human being. And like, there was just a Public Interest Alberta conference, and I was reading a quote from it, and one of the speakers was pointing out how a hedge fund manager makes 8,200 times what a nurse makes. And it's like, in what moral universe is a hedge fund manager considered to be 8,200 times more valuable than a nurse? So I just think it does, if we're saying like charge what I'm worth, then, well, what if somebody charges twice what I'm charging? Does that mean they're worth twice as much as a person? And I do feel like in the holistic New Age scene, it can be tied into that very explicitly and directly, where it's like, I just decided I was worth more, so I'm charging more, and that somehow shows that I'm more spiritually evolved because I can accept more abundance into my life, and and then people feel bad for not charging as much, and it can just be like, oh, but I want to help people, but I should charge what I'm worth, and so I just feel like, I guess the thrust of that article was wanting to really just disconnect those. It's like, charge whatever you want, and use whatever model you want to charge, but don't connect it to our self-worth. Like, those are just such separate issues. Charge what feels right, but that has nothing to do with what you're worth or what you deserve.
I suppose it could go the other way for those that aren't used to charging lots of money. Looking at someone who does, is there judgments around it or whatever?
How do you mean?
You charge $300 an hour,
right.
for example.
Right.
So you're totally worth it. I've had one-on-one
right.
consults with you, and I know that this has been a long time building towards this, and
right.
you have a legacy that you've built. But then someone looking on the outside who's making minimum wage or something,
right.
there's judgments on you, I would imagine.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. And because I think then there can be this, because it gets connected with self-worth. Who do you think you are? Think you're better than me for charging this? And I could look at people who charge more than me, $1,000 an hour, and be like, oh, So I just feel like, for me, pricing is a sort of intuitive process of like what feels right, but it's also a strategic thing of like what makes sense in any situation, because somebody might charge very little for, they might do a whole weekend workshop for free and give that away, knowing that a lot of those people are going to sign up for other things. So it makes sense to give that away for free because they know they've got a lot of back-end programs and other courses and one-on-one that they charge a lot for, and it makes sense, versus somebody who the weekend workshop is all that they have to offer, and it would be crazy to give it away for free because there isn't anything else people can sign up for. So they may need to charge more for that. I just feel like pricing is a very practical, intuitive question, and it gets way more complicated when it gets all tied up with our self-worth and what am I worth and what do I really deserve and what am I just feel like that becomes this real confusing process versus just a very practical, like, well, what are my needs? What's going to sustain me? What do I want to charge? What's an amount that feels good? And I think of most, like my colleague Mark Silver talks about this idea of resonant pricing. And I think for most people, if you really just sit with it, what do I feel comfortable charging? There's, you feel when it's off, like you think like, okay, charging $10 an hour. How does that feel? Oh God, terrible. Just so little, charging $1,000 an hour. Oh God, too much. I don't feel like I could stand behind that. $500 an hour? Oh, too much. $25 an hour? Still too little. And you do find there's a range that it's like, okay, $100 an hour, $125 an hour, yeah, like somewhere in there. And you just kind of find it. And I think it's more important to charge an amount that feels good for you, that you can just say without stumbling, that feels right, than the biggest amount possible. And yes, I think it's sometimes it makes sense for people to charge more. They're like, I'm charging $60 an hour and it feels good. But I think then sometimes if we really lift up the conversation of like, well, let's look at your life and the fact that you can't pay your bills and you're in debt and you owe people money and you're actually stressed a lot of the time because of money. And I think, do people deserve to have food and shelter and have their needs met and, those types of things? Yes. So it's like, are your needs actually being met? And I think that's where the collapsing happens, where it's like, oh, my needs, I don't deserve for my needs to be met. So I just think when meeting our needs gets conflated with our core self-worth, it's like, yes, you're worth, it's like you're worth having your needs met, but it's not like we're entitled to any particular thing, or our worth gets conflated to money in particular. So sometimes I think there has to be an honest conversation of like, is this really meeting your needs? Is this sustaining you? Does this actually feel good? Really? And sometimes yes, and sometimes no. And then if it's no, It's like, well, what's an amount that you could charge that would feel good? Even if it's scary, even if you're not sure that people would sign up, if you're honest with yourself, what would that number be? And it might be more. And then it's like, you know what? It would actually be 150. That would feel, oh my God, that would feel so good to get. And then it's just a strategic question of like, okay, how do we set it up so that the right people find you, so that they are getting value? How do we structure the offer? How do we make sure that people, feel good about it? You feel good about it. To me, then it just becomes a very practical question of how to orchestrate that. But if people are charging an amount that feels too high, I think that people just feel scared all the time. Like they feel like a fraud. They feel like they're going to be busted at any point. And people are going to point out you're not worth it. But if we charge too little, then we feel resentful, and we either snap or we just internalize it and feel terrible, forever and ever. And so, yeah.
I think that some of the things that you said fits into the next model is the sliding scale model. Yeah,
sliding scale, right, is this idea of like you could give anywhere between this amount and that amount. So sometimes, it'll be like anywhere between 10 and 20. Sometimes like anywhere from 1 to 100. But it's giving people some suggested range, a minimum and a maximum to give. So the sliding scale, I think, is, whereas pay what you can is really just like whatever you want to pay. There is no minimum, there's no maximum. I think the upside of sliding scale is you are giving people a range, so they're like, okay, if I give the maximum, I don't feel guilty that I didn't give enough, or downside of it, potentially people might have wanted to pay more is one, but also Mark Silver wrote this great article called The Horrors of the Sliding Scale, and his experience of going to workshops that were offered on a sliding scale was that it was the way that the healer or practitioner or whoever was running the workshop was not wanting to deal with their money issues and was just putting that on the audience. So they got to be like, oh no, I'm too, I don't want to sully myself with this. So you deal with, and it feels terrible to be in the audience when you feel like somebody is offloading their guilt about money onto you, just because they're too scared too scared to deal with it. But what's funny is, so it's all about, are people coming from this place of collapse or composure or posturing? And so the collapse and posturing, if you're like, neither of those feel great to be in the presence of. Whereas when people are in a real composed kind of place, I think it feels much better. And so with sliding scale, when people are in this collapsed place and just trying to offload it, feels awful. But if somebody's in a composed place, they can do sliding scale and it feels great. Like Charles Eisenstein, he wrote a book called Sacred Economics, and he would do a thing where he would, I joke about people being like, if you're not sure what to pay, just put some money in the bucket at the back of the room, or take money out, whatever you, as a collapsing thing. But he does that from a composed place where like he passes, this like bucket around an audience and is like, you've heard the talk. If you want to support this work and happening more, I invite you to consider what you might want to contribute, for this, and what the value of it was for you. And just how much do you want to invest in this message in the world, but also if money is really tight and maybe you need some, consider taking some out, and that this isn't charity, this is the community supporting itself. So very few people actually take anything out, but it's done in such a beautiful, composed way. And so when people take some out, it's like, oh my God, I just got supported by the community, and then he takes the money, and so that's from a very composed place. So I think sliding scale is great. I just think it ends up often being a default of, I don't want to name a price, or I don't want to deal with money and talk about that. So I'll just, which I guess can be fine when people are starting out, because you're still figuring it out and feeling out what feels comfortable. But yeah, I think it becomes such a default for forever, and then people don't get paid the amounts that feel right for them, and then they resent it, but they keep doing it and then just resenting people more. So
I suppose it goes back to having a clear agreement between you and the person who's paying you. Sliding scale works for me too, because I know with the rate isn't always fixed. For
right.
Most people it is, but say my mentors, because I feel like I've already gotten a lot from them
right.
free, then as a gift to them, I want to charge them a lesser rate, for example.
Well, this to me is interesting about pricing, is like it's arbitrary. Like pricing is 100% arbitrary, and I think it's like, easy to think there are some like hard and fast rules about it. But yeah, it's like, if it's your brother or your cousin, do you charge your full rates necessarily? You might just do it for free. And is that collapsing if it's a family member? Maybe if you do it all the time. But, it's like, it's not always so easy. And some people, I know they can afford to pay more, so I'm absolutely going to charge my full rate consistently and never give them a break. And there are other people I might give a break once in a while, and and that may or may not be collapsing. Yeah.
You mentioned gift economy. Will you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, so gift economy is this idea of, and this isn't even like a payment strategy, it's more of a philosophy about the world, but the idea that we're all born with inherent gifts, and that the world is richer when we're giving our gifts to the world, and that we want everybody to be contributing all of their gifts. And that when we give gifts, if I give you a birthday present, it's not like with an obligation to give something back. I'm giving it because I just want to give to you. I want to contribute to you. And so this idea of like, what if we had an economy where people were just giving to each other freely, and it wasn't tracked. It wasn't like, well, I gave Kim one birthday gift this year, and next year she didn't, and I gave her another birthday gift, and it's been 5 birthdays now, and I've never gotten anything back, and keeping track in that way. But people just giving and trusting that they will receive gifts from other people, not necessarily in any way connected to the person they gave to, but a culture of generosity and sharing, as opposed to a culture of accumulation and hoarding and greed. So I think it's a beautiful sentiment. It's I think tricky to do it in an economy that is often the opposite of that. So I've known people who've set up sort of gift economy businesses, and some of them have continued, and some of them have felt like they just had to stop or shift over to just charging a flat rate. Or some other model because it wasn't feeling great. But again, sometimes you might say, well, I work 5 days a week, and every Friday is Gift Economy Friday, and people can just come and pay whatever they want. So you might have it, or just once a month you do it, or you do a free weekend every year, a workshop every year. That is just Gift Economy. People can contribute however they want to, and you just do it for the joy of doing it. So I think there are ways to weave these things in. You might do your intros on a sliding scale, a weekend on a pay-as-you-can basis, charge flat rate for the one-on-one work, and then, once a year do a gift economy something, where you're just giving it up. So it's a beautiful philosophy. I think we're so far from it as a planet and, global economy. But I love, there's the Karma Kitchen in Oakland that I think it's just on Sundays. You go, and when you get your bill, it's just $0 on it, and you can just pay whatever you want to pay. Bon Jovi, the musician, has a restaurant called Soul Kitchen or something in Jersey, and it's a pay what you can restaurant, and like organic local food, and hotels will do it sometimes. Where they'll sometimes give a room on a sort of pay what you can basis, which is moving away from gift economy. But I guess the point is, like, within this sort of ethos of gifting and sharing, it's not like we have to make that a blanket on everything that we do. With all of these strategies, the barter, the sliding scale, gift economy, pay what you can, we can use them in some places, not use them in other places. We can try and see what fits for us in our circumstance, which may change also as your business develops and evolves.
Love it. Any other models that you know of and wanted to share about?
The other models for Well, I mean, there's definitely like sort of nonprofit or social enterprise models, which are really fascinating, where it might be like a nonprofit health clinic or a nonprofit yoga studio where money gets raised through grants or individual giving, and then the classes are subsidized, or a nonprofit grocery store where they might be able to subsidize the cost of the foods with money that they fundraise as well. There are co-op models where, it's a business and the profits are sort of shared internally. So there's that. I'm definitely fascinated by a lot of the social enterprise models or nonprofit business things, or where the businesses are volunteer run, so there are no there are less hard costs on the business, which means they can make it more affordable and more accessible for people. There are the group clinics where like acupuncture, where there'll be like 12 beds sort of in a room, and everyone's getting treated at the same time. They'll come in, but the needles put in, they'll lie there. Somebody will come and take the needles out and they leave. And it's much more affordable because of the group nature of it. And it's not quite as personalized, but they still get access to something. So, yeah, I think it's so important to be creative. And it's like the Pay What You Can came out of desperation for me of having a weekend that hadn't filled up at all. Like, nobody had signed up in Fairfield, Iowa, and out of desperation being like, just come and pay me what you want at the end. And then I started doing it. So I just encourage people to be really creative and think about, what would feel good in terms of how you charge. Because if you feel good about it, you're more likely to promote it. You're more likely to put it out. You're more likely to feel good asking for it. And if people try to weasel deals out of you, you're more likely to be able to say, you know what, that doesn't feel good to me, and be able to be stronger in that. But yeah, there's no right way to do it. There's no with money and charging. It's not like there's unless you're charging X amount, you're out of integrity with yourself and you're not valuing yourself or whatever. So I just encourage people to take chances, take risks, try something new if it feels right, if it feels good, and it'll either work or it won't. But then you've had an experiment, and you might come up with some new, payment method or model that works really well and inspires other people too. So,
thank you, Dad.
You're welcome.